You're good to start.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this special finance meeting of Finance and Corporate Services Committee. It's our final budget day, and we've done quite a bit of work to get to the point that we are at now. I would open the floor if anyone wanted to make any brief opening comments. I'd ask you, try to keep them, to a couple minutes or less, if so. So looking for any hands to go up on the side if anyone has any opening comments. I'm not seeing any. I will just say very briefly, Councillor Gazzola, go ahead.
Yeah, I will make a comment, just a brief comment. I know most of council is extremely happy with the budget where it stands now. It's pretty good, but it's not the best we can do. I'm quite disappointed at where we're at. When I look at the inflation rate for last year was an increase of 0.62%. Although our tax rate is only going up by 1.1%, our departmental expenditures, as shown on page final 10, are increasing by 3.1%. So I'm really not going along with the statement that the city's 2021 budget is one of fiscal restraint. A 3% expenditure increase when the inflation rate is only 0.62% is to me is not acceptable. I was really hoping for a 0% increase for this year because it's been an extremely bad year. Yes, I know it's one of the lowest rates we've had in many years, but the province has been extremely generous to the city in giving us $13 million, wiping out any shortfalls that we had for last year. And that's, the province doesn't get its money from heaven. It gets it from us, from our other pocket. And we're going to have to make that up in the future years. And for that reason, I would like to, by the end of the day, see us come in with a 0% increase. We balanced staff's budget here for this year. Staff came forward with a balanced budget. Since then, we've been promised, and I guess we've already received, $2.5 million in additional provincial funding. So that $2.5 million, in my way of thinking, should wipe out the 1.4 million increase that we're looking at, and making that up with a 1.1% increase in taxes. With that $2.5 million from the province, we don't need to increase taxes. And it's, really, we've got an awful lot of gall going to the province and asking for money. And when we get money, we're basically putting the money in the bank. It's not what that money was for. And we're going to have to pay that money back. Our not maybe through municipal taxes, we're going to have to pay that back in the future. So I'm not pleased where we're at. I won't waste much of council's time during the day asking questions because I can really see where we're going, but I'm totally disappointed that in this year that happens with hopefully not more than once in 100 years, that we can't come across with a 0% increase. I just spent a long time this morning with one of my constituents who's in the restaurant business, and they are struggling. A 1% increase to them means a lot. So thank you for listening to me. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll try to be brief as well. I didn't really necessarily have much comments to say. I think the proof is before us of the hard work that staff have put into in bringing a well-balanced budget. The reason why I keyed in to speak, hearing Councillor Gazzola mentioning that he's disappointed at this budget. I hold a lot of regard for Councillor Gazzola and put a lot of faith in his understanding of the budget, of being a former CEO for the City of Kitchener and heading the finance department. And he understands best of the various constraints that are felt and having been managed for last year under the pandemic. The City of Kitchener has had to face a multi-million-dollar deficit, which we are getting some relief from the province, but that's not to say that there's still a lot of room that needs to be made up for. That too, on top, that we have various organizations that we are partner or fund, as an example, Senator Square, who are also facing deficits that we would have to share in that deficit, which adds additional burden for the City of Kitchener. We're looking at a 1.1% tax increase where we may end up falling a little below than that or around that. That 1.1% tax rate will be still below or at the inflationary increase of the last 2-year average, which is the council policy, which is what we've heard from our residents through various different surveys. I think we are at a very good position currently. This rate of 1.1, even if it's passed as presented, will be the lowest rate over the last 9 years. Presenting the lowest rate over the last 9 years during or after a full year of being in a pandemic and various activities with the city being shut down or closed and dealing with deficits, I think that's a very good position to be in. That too, on top of it, we're presenting a budget where we've added tremendous services to our organization through the Equity and Diversity Inclusion strategic plan, through the Cycling Master Plan, and of course, the Economic Development Strategy. These are paramount and fundamental pieces of work that staff have been able to take lead from what council wants and presented those strategic plans and incorporate it into a budget. Again, and I'm repeating myself, that is 1.1% lowest over 9 years and the lowest in the region. I think that's something to be proud of. And I think that's something that we need to compliment our staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Rabinovich.
Thanks, Chair Davey. I wasn't planning on making any opening comments and was going to save them for throughout the budget, but I feel that I do need to make some opening comments in light of some of the others. I think it's fair to say that the amount of work that's been done by staff to get this budget to this point has been significant, and I really want to applaud and thank staff for their efforts in doing so. As Councillor Singh has indicated, and I think as we all know, there have been immense challenges on us as a municipality. And yes, we've been fortunate through our advocacy and the advocacy of municipalities across Ontario and across the country to get much of those losses covered, not just by the province, but in fact by the federal government and the province of Ontario, who partnered to support municipalities through the Safe Restart funding. That funding has been essential so that cities like Kitchener and regions like the region of Waterloo can continue to deliver the services that were vital and essential to our residents during the pandemic. And those services have ranged from providing, keeping our community centers open as much as we can, using them as food distribution points where they're necessary, increasing investment in the shelter system, and so on. As Councillor Singh indicated, we've also continued to work on the priorities of this community going forward, including our economic development strategy, our equity, diversity, and inclusion task force, the cycling investments, and other areas. Because coming out of COVID-19, we want to make sure we're positioned as best as we can be to build back better and see this community continue to grow. This, our community was the second fastest growing community in the country this past year. And I think that speaks to the good work and efforts of this council, of our staff, and of the region as a whole. And I think the budget that's before us, there will no doubt be some adjustments made today, but I think we're starting at an excellent point at the beginning of this budget day. And I think at the end, we have a budget that we're going to be able to be proud of, that will continue to focus on the programs and services that are important to our residents, while recognizing that we want a fiscal approach that also recognizes the challenges that some of our residents are feeling. And I think we've done that by bringing in the lowest increases in a decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I don't want to repeat what's already been. I just want to be clear that the funding we received in the report, grateful for it. It doesn't cover everything. We've got some significant revenue challenges, and we've got significant challenges coming up in 2021 that we're going to have to deal with. So the funding we received from the government is very gratefully accepted. It's appreciated. It doesn't cover everything. We have to do our work as well.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, mine is more a question, and it's drawing from what Mayor Vrbanovic just said about adjustments that might come out of this meeting today. So my question is, I was just looking at the November 30th comparative budget by division document we received at the end of November, and comparing it to the final budget document we received last week, and they're identical. So I'm just wondering, is this the norm? Is this how this normally works? Even though we've had public input and discussions with council, is it normal that what we see at the very beginning continues to be identical a few months later? I'm looking at page 018 in the November document, and at final -10 in the current document.
Mr. Haggie.
Through the chair, I assume you're talking about the projected actual for 2020. So it is very common for the budget to remain the same through the process. For the last number of years, we have presented a budget, staff present a budget, it is reviewed and discussed by council, and then changes to it are made on final budget day. So that is very common. Has been our practice. I've been here about 10 years, and that's been the practice essentially that whole time. For the actuals, they reflect the amounts that we put in, or the projected numbers for 2020. Those reflect the figures that we put forward to the Safe Restart application process, and we left them the same so that they reflect what we had put forward. As you can imagine, my staff and other staff have been quite busy with lots of other things, and have not had an opportunity to do a significant review of our projected financial position at the end of the year for 2020.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Gazzola, briefly, please.
Yes, since nobody was going to speak until I spoke, so I guess I've started something. I just did want to point out what Councillor Chapman did bring forward. I went back to see, and there has not been one change made. It means that the projections that were brought forward for 2020 by staff at the end of, they would have been based on, I imagine, the end of October figures. There's been no change whatsoever. And that sometimes can be really misleading. I would have thought that there could have been updated figures based on actual figures as of the end of December. And as a result of this, I noticed in reviewing the capital forecast, for example, the opening balances in the reserve funds were much different than what was presented to council on budget day. A lot of major differences. So there are a lot of differences that may have gone forward that I feel have not been taken into account. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll make brief comment. Overall, I too think it's prudent to acknowledge what staff has done since this pandemic started. They, like many of our residents, had to fundamentally change how they ran this organization and how they communicated, and the way that they transitioned so quickly and so effectively without significant extra costs needs to be acknowledged to start. I personally am very happy with this budget. I'm a creature of consistency, I would say, and we have set out rules in terms of what our budget targets are. And that target that council approved is the average inflation over 2 years. So the data we have this year plus the data that was last year, we combine it. Yes, there will be slightly over and above in any given year, but in the fullness of time, that will ensure that residents' tax bills, assuming we hold to that, will always hold to the rate of inflation. For reference, the latest data we have has that combined increase at 1.3% inflation for Ontario. Right now, we're looking at, if those of you that have looked a little closely at the document, we're sitting at 0.91%. That's some 40% less than the target that we've all agreed upon, that residents have come forward and said they think is a reasonable figure. We're under that because we're responding to COVID-19, but more importantly is our water and sewer rates as well. That takes up a huge chunk and many times drowns out even the tax levy increase portion of the budget, and that's coming in right around the same amount. So each of those is $1 a month. A cup of coffee from Tim Hortons is $2.50, and that's the small one. All right. So these are the figures we're talking about. Getting down to 0% is going to be, we're talking about getting down $1 a month to the average home. Okay, so this is the minutia in which we're setting these parameters and targets. I am very happy with where we are in the budget today. I do expect some changes. Changes always come on final budget day. There are typically very few changes between the beginning and final budget day, so that's expected and common practice. So at the end of the day, my only hope is that we stick to that 1.1% figure or under. I know there are some members of council that want to see some changes and tweaks, and I hope that we can incorporate some of those, but let's see how the day goes. With that, I believe the opening remarks are coming from our CFO, Mr. Lautenbach. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Just waiting for the presentation to come up. Well, good afternoon, Chair Davey and members of committee. Today is final budget day. And as we near the end of another budget process, I wanted to just start the day by first acknowledging the work of staff and just thanking them for the effort that goes into putting the budget together. Certainly this year's budget was much different than previous years, but there was still significant effort that was required in terms of bringing it forward to council. So I do want to thank Mr. Hagee and his team, but also the corporate leadership team, as well as directors, managers, and other staff that provide input into the budget each and every year. The next slide, please. One more, please. As council is aware, back at the end of November, we reviewed and discussed the operating budget. On December 14th, we also reviewed and discussed the capital budget, and there were a few follow-up items that have been included as follow-up issue papers in the package today. You will recall as well that on December 14th, council had approved the final water utility rates, and so those are already set. And so really today's discussion is focused on the tax support operations and what the final tax levy related increase will be for 2021. Next slide, please. Our 2021 budget strategy, as a reminder, has been much different than in previous years due to the financial realities that the pandemic has created for the city. It's been really focused on maintaining existing services for residents, and that's been very intentional in terms of not wanting to reduce or cut services at this time. But in order to do that, it required a strategy for us to hold the line and maintain 2020 budgeted levels, as well as look at a strategy of reducing 2021 capital spending in order to increase our stabilization reserves to be able to address what are projected to be expected shortfalls in 2021, very similar to what we experienced in 2020. And next slide, please. At the end of December, we did receive some good news from the province in that we were successful in receiving additional funding under the Safe Restart operating funding agreement. And as you will recall, we were provided with an initial allocation of $5.9 million as part of the phase one funding announcement earlier in 2020. We had applied for additional funding to cover off what we projected to be our impacts for the remainder of the year, and we were successful in receiving $7.1 million. And so those two allocations will be very helpful in addressing our projected deficit for 2020. It is like hitting the reset button in terms of being in a good position heading into 2021. But as I mentioned, we know that the impacts will continue this year as the pandemic continues. In addition to that, we also received $2.5 million in 2021 funding as an allocation from the province, which is far less than what we had received in 2020 and could signal that it may be the only funding we receive this year in terms of operating funding. I think an important thing to note is that this funding has to be applied against actual impacts created by COVID-19. So it can't be adjusted and incorporated into the budget in terms of a permanent funding source. As part of that, it does have to be applied against actual expenses. In terms of how that impacts our overall strategy for this year, it will likely reduce the funding need potentially that we need to transfer from capital to the tax stabilization reserve, although we don't exactly know what that figure looks like at this point. It really will depend on various factors this year as we move throughout 2021. And so you will note that we are still asking for authorization to transfer up to $5 million to cover off expected impacts if needed. And again, that will depend on what the balance looks like in our tax stabilization reserves. Based on the projected shortfalls that we expect to still see in 2021, we know that at the end of 2021, our reserve balances will likely be well below pre-pandemic levels. And we will also have impacts that will carry over into the next year. It will depend on what our final 2020 results look like, as well as mitigation measures that we take this year to offset some of those impacts very similar to what we did in 2020 to be responsible in terms of managing those financial challenges. Next slide, please. This slide was part of the operating budget package back on November 30th when we presented the budget. And really it just highlights for council that we do expect we will have some significant revenue shortfalls. In particular, the biggest one being recreation related revenue. And obviously, having started the year in a lockdown scenario without programs being able to operate, certainly highlights the fact that we likely will be very short in terms of these revenue lines in 2021. And so we have to plan accordingly to make sure that we can cover these impacts with the reserves that are in place in order to do so. Next slide, please. If we look at our tax supported stabilization reserves, you'll see that at the end of 2020, the balance is back up again, and that is largely due to the fact that we have received that additional Safe Restart funding. It brings it back to around the minimum balance for those reserves, but you can see that at the end of 2021, we are projecting that we will likely be around the 350,000 mark based on just those projected shortfalls, that initial projected shortfalls right now in terms of mending balance in that reserve. And also projecting a negative balance in 2022 and beyond if we don't transfer funding from capital as we had originally planned. Next slide, please. During the capital budget discussion, there was some questions about whether we could draw additional funding from capital related reserves to address some of the either expanding the capital program or address some of the operating impacts for this year. And we often look at reserves in terms of a point in time. Obviously, the balance at the end of the year is important, but also looking forward and seeing sort of what the projections are for the reserve also informs decisions as we move forward. And so you can see that the capital pool reserves, which we typically use to fund our tax supported capital related requests, based on the 10-year capital forecasts already in front of you for consideration, we are seeing some negative trends in terms of the financial capacity in those reserves. You see that they are trending downward. And certainly in 2023 and 2024, right now, we're projecting that they would be below their minimum balance. And so it really just is a message to say that we don't have the capacity, at least at this point, to be making any kind of expansions to programs. But we have been looking, as we have in the past, to other capital grant opportunities to move things forward and other means to expand the program when we have those type of opportunities. Next slide, please. And so we're starting the day off today where we started the process, recommending a 1.1% tax rate increase. Now, you will note that there is an issue paper that does outline an option to reduce that percentage down further to around the 0.9% mark if council decides to proceed with that. And that's related to the Huron-Brigadoon Community Center, where the operating impacts are now expected to be 1 year later. So those impacts would still have to be incorporated into the budget next year, but wouldn't necessarily have to be reflected in this year's overall increase. And I do want to just point out that we do have the benefit of knowing that both the City of Waterloo and Cambridge have finalized their budgets at 3.5% and 1.27%. And so even if we remain at the 1.1%, we know that we're at the lowest percentage of the cities in the region. And I think what that really speaks to is the balance that we've tried to strike with this budget, recognizing that we need to maintain our existing services, but also be responsive to many members of the community that we know are struggling due to the pandemic, both residents and businesses. And I think we have struck the right balance with our overall increase, which is the lowest impact that we've had in over a decade. The water utility rate increase very similar, and it's already set at 0.9, and certainly gas was approved earlier in the year as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of some final thoughts, certainly this year's budget has been different than past years and has been more focused on fiscal restraint. It's been focused on maintaining the value programs and services for the community. And as I mentioned, it does recognize the financial pressures faced by individuals and businesses by proposing the lowest increase in over a decade and trying to strike that right balance. It does reflect, in my view, a responsible approach for responding to the financial realities of COVID-19 in terms of planning and ensuring that we have sufficient reserves to cover off impacts that we know will continue. In terms of the Safe Restart funding, certainly it has been extremely helpful, and we are very grateful for the funding that has been provided from the other levels. It will address our 2020 impacts, or we anticipate it will. But I do think the interesting thing to note is that the 2021 allocation that was provided was much less than what we received in 2020. And I do believe it signals that we may not receive additional operating funding this year. And so that will require us to take measures on our own, very similar to what we did in 2020, to make sure we are responsible in terms of managing some of those shortfalls and impacts that we know will still be coming. In terms of looking beyond 2021, we know that the economic fallout of the pandemic isn't fully known at this point. And so that's something that we're going to still need to monitor as we move throughout the year. But we do know that revenue shortfalls, although they'll probably be more significant this year, will likely also occur in 2022. And so I think what that does is highlights the importance to make sure that we do have sufficient reserves to not only address what we anticipate to be this year's challenges, but looking out even further beyond that as well. And then finally, we know that economic recovery is going to be extremely important. I do believe that this budget puts forward a plan that it will be responsive if there are stimulus opportunities that become available. We know that in 2008 with the recession, that municipalities played a big role in terms of the economic recovery through capital dollars that were provided. And so we are ready to take advantage of those when they become available. And at the same time, the city has also positioned itself well in terms of supporting the local economy through EDIF 2.0. Both in the short term and also the long-term investments that will help the community bounce back when the pandemic is over. And so with that, I will turn it over back to you, Chair Davey, if there are any questions you have to answer it. Otherwise, we can get into the detailed discussions for today.
Thank you, Mr. Lautenbach. One question, Councillor Gazzolo.
Yes, I have one question that refers back to a schedule that wasn't shown but was included in our package, and that relates to page final 10 in our package. Is that statement available to put on the screen?
I don't believe it's part of the slide deck, but you're referring to Schedule 1 in terms of the operating budget schedule that's in the report.
Yes, page final 10. It's really the budget. It's the budget picture in 2 pages. It's really the only information we really have. But looking at the 2020 projections, it is projecting a $7.1 million deficit. Does that $13 million from the senior governments not completely wipe that out?
So through the chair, we do believe that that full amount of the deficit will be covered based on the funding that we received. That was the intent of the application. It was to try to cover what our projected shortfall would be over and above the initial allocation that was provided. So the intent of the phase 2 application was to fully cover all of our impacts. We're still showing the deficit on that page, but it will be the tax stabilization reserve where that safe restart funding was allocated to that will be drawn out to cover the deficit at the end of the year. And we'll be finalizing the final projected deficit, which we normally do, and bring to council in March in terms of what the fund variance looks like.
You've lost me. You've lost me. We're showing a deficit of $7 million. Does the $13 million not completely wipe that out so that the reserve funds are not affected?
So through the chair, yes, that's exactly what we expect will happen. It was part of our application to fully cover the 7.1 million. The full 13 also included other impacts in other areas. So golf, as you know, was impacted by the pandemic as well, and also parking. And so it's not limited to just the tax stable or the tax operations in terms of that funding. It was a request from the province to identify all impacts across all operations. And so that's why it's a larger amount in terms of the funding that was provided versus the 7.1. In terms of where that funding is, we have put in reserve, and so that's why it will, through the final report that we bring to council in March, be applied against that deficit.
Yeah, I appreciate that the other $6 million I trust has been allocated to the other operations that don't affect the tax impact. The point is, from the $13 million that we received from the senior governments, we were left whole for last year without impacting any of our reserve savings.
So through the chair, that is our expectation, is that when we finalize the numbers, it will have covered all of our anticipated deficit for 2020. That's correct. But what we do know is that in 2021, we will have other pressures that we're going to have to manage very similar to what we experienced in 2020.
But in fairness, we really don't know anything yet about 2021. And we don't know that we're not going to get more money from the province. So we really don't know these things at this point. You're taking a viewpoint that if I were on staff, I would probably take the same viewpoint. But at this point, we know that we balanced our budget, and we also have $2.5 million over and above that. So thank you.
Mayor Verbenovich.
Oops. Thanks, Chair Davey. And I think, building on Councillor Gazzola's question there, he is correct in saying that we don't know anything one way or the other over and above the 2021 funding that has already been announced. It's fair to say that as recently as last Friday, the Ontario Big City Mayors and, AMO, FCM, BCMC are and will be advocating for funding to assist municipalities with the losses we're going to incur in 2021 as a result of COVID. I think our staff have taken the prudent assumption of ensuring that we don't assume those dollars. And secondly, we need to recognize the fact that we have deferred significant capital projects, both in 2020 and again in 2021, in order to help us mitigate those losses if they happen. And at some point, we're going to need to play catch up on that. So I think we can't lose sight of that as we go forward. And certainly, if we're able to get the dollars, and I'm certainly hopeful we'll get at least some of them, then that will help ensure that we don't have an increasing infrastructure deficit that's left behind as a result of COVID for us to deal with and future generations to deal with.
Okay, there's sorry, Councillor Gazzola. You're muted, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I had to step out. I got I'm sorry. I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. There's no one else, Mr. Lautenbach. I just summarize my feelings on the comments I just heard is that I think it's our duty to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I think that's what we're doing. Mr. Lautenbach, please continue.
So next slide, we'll pass the presentation now over to Mr. Hagee.
Sure. So I'll be helping manage the next few slide decks or next few slides. If you're interested in following the budget or tweeting about it, if you can use the hashtags, there would be helpful for people to find them. As we go through this, many of you have been through a number of budgets, but just to remind you, there really isn't a whole lot of staff presentation. Most of the content that needs to be presented has already been presented. There are some follow-up issue papers that will help guide some of the discussion. There's some items that council specifically asked to come back, and one that was identified by staff after the fact and are included in today's budget package. At the end of the process, we will have a passed budget resolution, which will be forwarded to the council and then ultimately set the budget for 2021. Next slide, please. First up are going to be the boards. I understand representatives from Kitchener Public Library and Center of the Square are here. If we can go to the next slide, I believe it's Kitchener Public Library that is up first. And so the information shown on slide here reflects the information that was originally provided through the 2021 budget. There was a discussion and some follow-up information or requested by council to see the revised budget that included the change in operation regarding fines. The budget resolution that was sent out to council by me last week and has been included in your print version that you have. We're looking for passage of resolution number 4 of that regarding KPL's operating line or operating budget, as well as their ability to use their 2020 budget or 2020 projected surplus to offset overdue fines, and a commitment from the council to look at adding money to the budget in 2022. So, Mr. Chair, you'd suggest that it would be time to move this budget or ask questions about it by council.
Okay, questions first, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Marsh?
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't have any questions, but I am prepared to.
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. Any comments? I'm just going to comment briefly. I had a conversation with Ms. Chevreau with respect to the waiving of fines, and I'm prepared to support this now, but I just basically, I know this doesn't carry any weight except for me saying it, but I'm holding out hope to those members of council that are on that committee as well. I'm holding out hope that you can take another hard look at the waiving of fines in a progressive fashion. In other words, hoping that you can still find a way to recover some funds from those with the ability to pay. I understand the principle is the divide of those that of low income, but I'd really like to see if it's possible to recover some of that $100,000 and invest that back into materials to the library. So I'm leaving it as a comment, but I do intend to support. And I do have 2 other people in the queue now as well. Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I want to start off by stating that I'm extremely pleased in our library. Our library has always done a tremendous job for our community. I don't have any problems with their budget. In fact, they've been very they over the years they've really given the people of the city good value for their money. But having said that, I will not support this budget. Or if you can divide it into 2 parts, I will support the main grant portion, and within time too, I'm prepared to look at the issue of fines and all of that. And within time, I'm prepared to going down the road to support that. But not at this time. I don't really think we've done enough work, or I'm sure maybe the library has done the work, but I don't think we've had enough information for us to really make a judgment on that, because it's quite an issue and quite a different principle, a different philosophy that we're doing with doing away with these fines because people are upset. I would like to see a much broader investigation and report on that before we sit here and give a clear blanket on it. So I will support the first part, but I will not at this time support the second part. Thank you.
Okay, and again, if anyone, it is simple to break out though for that voting, Councillor Gazzola, on the comprehensive page part. It's under option number 4. So basically, you would be approving the first sentence and then voting against the second 2 parts of that. Okay, there are a few more people in the queue. Next up is Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. I do want to just add to the conversation because I am a member of the KPL board. Like many organizations, including our corporation, the City of Kitchener, the KPL did a lot of self-reflection and has created a statement to talk about how we intend to do better in terms of equity, and when we need to do a lot of learning, as we know. And so one of the things that we have come to learn is that library fines, for those of us who can afford to pay them, who would have thought that they are a very important factor in equity, because those people who for whom it is a struggle to pay those library fines, if they just have one bad week or two and they owe fines to the library, then they can't pay it back, but then they feel embarrassed, or there's a barrier now for them to come back and talk to the library. And we don't want to assume that that certain people can pay and other people cannot, and we don't want to get into low income cutoff verifications. So what we need to do is trust the experts in this area. We need to look at how there's a new trend across Canada, across North America, in fact, in removing fines, so that we can add to our contribution and in increasing the level of equity with regard to library customers. So I agree that because this is uncharted waters for City of Kitchener libraries, we don't know the impact. And I will bring the concerns that have been raised here today back to the library board. But I can also just let you know that the library has a history of being very good at being responsive. And so if we see in a year that this policy needs tweaking, then we will do so. But let's look at what the impact will be on people, everybody accessing the library, and perhaps we will, do additional learning as we go and need to tweak it further. So let's see, and I encourage all of my colleagues to support this.
Thank you. I didn't see who queued in first between Councillor Johnson and Councillor Schneider, but Councillor Johnson, you're higher in the thing, so you're going to go first. Councillor Johnson.
Right. Well, thank you. And yes, thank you, Councillor Marsh, for your comments around the equity piece. I did receive one comment from a resident with regards to this particular issue, and I believe they copied in Councillor Gazzola as well. You know, once we, they had a concern around, you know, things being set aside for their book club, et cetera. And they were concerned that if people didn't, you know, get their books back in time, that would be an issue for them. So I explained about the equity piece, and I really feel that they understood then and felt okay with that as well. So I absolutely will be supporting this. I think it's a really important way to look at equity instead of setting income boundaries and things on it. That let's do this. Let's you know, I'm sure we'll get a report back next year or perhaps sooner on how this went. And I trust our staff in bringing this forward. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. We heard from Ms. Chevreau that this fine thing is not a deterrent. It doesn't work. Our libraries are the great equalizer, and those that need the library the most are hurt the most by this. So it's an antiquated old system that doesn't work. The library is the great equalizer. It's about equity, and I am fine with not charging these fines, and I'm sure the library will come up with other ways of raising this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple comments in addition to what Councillor Marsh already said with regards to the equity piece. That we are looking at, the KPL is looking at making up the difference of the reduction of the revenues that come from library fines by increasing the room rental revenue when it's possible. Obviously, that may not happen this year, but it's something that can help offset the cost. And that's, I think, an important piece. And it's also important to note that studies have shown that materials and books do come back. It's not that they're going to be lost forever. It just, they may not be always specifically on time. And so I think that's another important piece. And then one other piece I wanted to highlight was that the KPL has a $250,000 surplus this year. They're not coming with a deficit. They worked really hard in order to make sure that they came in on budget. And in fact, they came in with a surplus. And I think with that, it's important for us to allow them to look at something new with regards to the fees and the fines. And so I just wanted to make those couple points in addition to what's already been said.
Thank you, Councillor Gallery-Seelock and Mayor Verbanovich.
Thanks, Chair Davey. I will be supporting the budget as it's before us. I think it's important for us to remember one thing is what we're really voting on today is the budget amount. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that there is a separately appointed library board, of which we do have 2 members on, that actually make these decisions. And so in fact, on the issue of fines, the library board could in fact make that decision without council's direction. They've come to us presenting that this is something that they're doing, that there are some funding issues associated with it, and have been very transparent, which I applaud them for, recognizing that there may be some funding assistance needed in order to implement this equity-focused initiative going forward. But you know, I think we need to be clear that we actually don't have a say on if this is a direction that the library will go. This is a decision that is made by the library board, and our influence, I guess, really only aligns with the budget amount. But notwithstanding that, I am supportive of where they're going with it for all of the reasons that have been articulated. And you know, I recognize the fact that the library has consistently been one of the most valued resident services anytime we do a resident survey. and I believe it'll continue to be going forward, particularly in this post-pandemic period.
Okay, and Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I want to clarify uh, something that the mayor has said. So I guess, Mr. Mayor, you're suggesting that if I don't agree with where we're going in that other direction, and I want to make it very clear that I don't disagree with it. Actually, I was mentioned in the paper that I was opposed to where we're going with that. I'm not opposed to that. I'm asking now for more information. What several of you are saying, well, let's go and do it, and then we'll come back and report upon it. Fine. So I guess, Mr. Mayor, you're suggesting that the only governance issue that we have here is with their budget, and therefore that's the only one we should really be voting on. Then we should not be even considering the second aspect, which is under their complete control. Is that correct?
Mayor Bench, did you want to reply?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, Councilor Gazzola, that is correct. I mean, this is a governance issue and a policy decision of the library board. They've made that decision. That decision may be impacted, or the implementation of it may be impacted, or it may not, by the funding decisions we make. But our focus needs to be on the funding piece. And allow the library board to make the governance issues, just much like they do around hours of operation, book acquisitions, all those other kinds of things that that the board may deal with from time to time.
I have no problem with that. That's exactly what they're there as a board for. So therefore, the only issue we should be talking about today then is the budget request, the operating grant. So the other aspect should not even be on the table. That should be left up to them. So.
Yes, and again, I don't want to bog this discussion down, but I guess the part that, Councillor Gazzola, if you're concerned about this, the part that needs to be clear is that, and I know it's definitely out of the ordinary, but the KPL is looking for us to signal they want to move ahead with looking at the fines this year, and they're going to cover off this year with their own surplus, but they're looking for us to signal that if they need an additional $100,000 in 2022, will we notionally approve that, and that is in the actual portion of that. So I think what I'm going to have to do is take the two items separately in the recorded vote. First will be the budget as presented, and the second part will be whether we're indicating we will support the $100,000 ask in 2022 if needed in its entirety. Okay, is everyone clear on that? And I assume both are, well, Councillor Marsh moved both of those. So, okay, sorry, I have two more people in the queue. Councillor Chapman, you haven't spoke yet.
Yeah, just for clarification. So if we approve the additional 100,000 if necessary, for as soon as 2022, does that mean the city grant would by default be an increment of 100,000 every year thereafter?
No, it would be a one-time, basically staff would build it into the 2022 budget, that one-time $100,000, and that would presumably cover it in future years. And they also get an inflationary increase every year as well. So it would be a one-time $100,000 add, ongoing, but it would only impact us in terms of that 0.1% roughly once. Does that make sense?
Right, but what I'm saying is, so the revised budget grant for this year is 11,410,000. For 2022, we would potentially increase it by 100,000 in the following year. On top of that, the inflation. So it's not just a one-time $100,000 gift. It's saying this is going to increase our grant amount. Is that correct? I just want clarification.
Yes, yeah, it'll increase the total amount by $100,000.
Yeah, from here forward.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, so just for clarification, number 4 of our motions to pass, I think there are 3 paragraphs, and so just wanted to make sure we vote properly on those.
Yep. So I think the simplest way of looking at that, Councillor Marsh, would be we're voting on the base budget for the first sentence, and then the part with respect to the overdue fines is sort of combined in the second 2 clauses. Is that?
Yeah, except we're talking about the three things basically. It's the budget, the operating funding, the 2020 surplus to be able to offset costs this year, and then the third one would be looking ahead to 2022.
Yeah, and I think just in the interest of time too, I do think that if no one argues, I would think that the second 2 parts, because it's going to take a while to go through all the recorded votes today, I think the second 2 parts go hand in hand. So if you're going to vote against the third one, you're going to be voting against the second one as well. Okay, clear. So recorded votes been called. I'm going to try to go through this quickly today. Hope everyone's quick to respond. We're going to begin with Ward. I think we're voting on, actually, you know what? Why don't we do both at the same time? So just so everyone's clear, when I ask you to vote, you're voting on 2 parts. The first part, you would say affirmative to the base budget, and then affirmative or negative to the fine aspect, okay? So we'll go through and I'll try and do those both at the same time. And we'll start with Councillor Schneider.
Sorry, trying to unmute there. Affirmative to number 1 and affirmative to number 2.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm going to vote to make it easy, but I really shouldn't be voting on the second part because it's not our deal. But to make it easy, I will vote affirmative on the first part and negative on the second part.
Thank you. Councillor Michaud.
I'll vote affirmative to the first and the second. Affirmative to both.
Thank you. Councillor Gallo-Seelock.
I'm in support of both parts.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
I'm in support of both parts.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor for both.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Affirmative for both.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yes, I support both.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
I'm in support of both as well.
Thank you. And Mayor Verbenovich.
Yes to both.
Very good. And I'm in support of both as well, so both of those pass. Thank you. Let's continue on to Center in the Square.
Next slide, please. Through you, Mr. Chair, the Center in the Square is next up. There was a request that they present some adjusted budget figures, which are on the right-hand column here, or second to last right column. And it includes the traditional things that they've been asking for about transitional funding, as well as keeping their surplus, but splitting deficits 50-50. It's number 5 in the resolution sheet right under the library that we just looked at.
Very good. Any questions on this? I'm not seeing any. Could I get someone to move by Councillor Ioannidis? And I guess, again, recorded vote for everything. So let's try, one moment here. Okay, let's do this backwards. Mayor Verbenovich.
Yes. Sorry, supportive.
Councillor Marsh.
In support.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I support it.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnston. Councillor Johnson still on the call. I'll come back. Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Singh.
In favor.
Councillor Gallo-Seelock.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Michaud.
In favor.
Councillor Gazzola.
In support.
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Councillor Johnson, are you back yet?
In favor.
Oh, very good. Okay, that carries unanimously. Okay, please continue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the next section deals with enterprise budgets. Next slide, please. So there have been minimal changes to the financial information that's been presented. The difference is we've reflected the Safe Restart funding in the kind of year-ending position for the relevant enterprises where Safe Restart applies. Those are all included as an appendix to the budget day report that Council has before them. Next slide, please. Just to remind Council, and Mr. Lautenbach already mentioned it, that all of the fees have already been set, so there's no ability really to adjust what will be charged in 2021 for any of the enterprises. You've done that through user fees, through gas reports, or for the WIP report, all of those being dealt with in 2020. Next slide, please. There is one issue paper that regarding gas, and it's one that staff indicated would be coming back to Council about gas meter replacement, needing increased funding for it. That $1 million increase that's included in the issue paper is reflected in the financial information that's shown on the gas page. So essentially all of those budgets are all in. So that's it as far as presentation goes. Mr. Chair, I'd look to you whether you want to have them all passed together or individually.
Okay, we'll see in just a moment. First questions, Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, that's a quick question on the gas meters. From what I understand, we have a pot of money, a budget for gas meters, and you're asking that. Are we asking that we put an additional $1 million in this year, than more than we would normally put in? Is that what the ask is here?
So through the chair, yes, this ask is for an additional $1 million for gas meter replacement based on the average number of meters. But we do know that the gas meter required for changeouts fluctuate from year to year based on testing done annually. And so this is as a result of the testing where we have a large cohort of meters that require replacement in 2020.
So what is the annual amount that we normally put in to this account?
The normal amount is before the 1 million is 2.6 million.
2.6 million. Okay, I'm just trying to look at what the history is. We spent 2.7 million. How did you spend 2.7 million last year if you didn't have it? Or did you have enough last year?
So through the chair, we were overspent in 2019, and that was shown through the existing capital budgets. We were anticipating being able to make up that through the 2020 meter replacement. However, the meter testing did not pass the testing, so we also had to replace the 2020 meters. And in addition, we have a large cohort coming in 2021, 2022 of meters. And so we will be doing the testing on those, but we know that there's pressures in terms of meter replacement.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not arguing. The figures, for 2018, 2019, you only spent $1.2 million, $1.4 million, and we were putting in 2.6. You must have had a lot of money left over from those 2 years, and some of which, well, none of which you would have even used in 2020 because you only spent 2.6, and that's what you put in every year. I was just trying to understand why you needed the $1 million extra, and going forward, does this mean you're putting in $1 million extra every year?
No, so through the chair, Councillor Gazzola, you raise a really good point. In the past, we did not budget based on average. We budgeted based on worst case. And we did find that we were closing out monies from the capital. So that practice changed in recent years. And now that we have a large cohort of meters, we went from 5,000 up to 15,000 meters. And so with that larger cohorts, that's why the funding. In terms of future years, we do believe, again, the intent is if we do have large cohorts, we would look at pulling from the reserve instead of budgeting at worst case. That being said, come 2023, the meter inventory required for changeout decreases significantly. So it fluctuates on a year-to-year basis.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. Just one final question. You did the study testing last year, and I understand 15,000, and it came out that they were all bad. I thought that some of them would have been good. Okay, and in line with that, also the other question I wanted to have, those 15,000 that were not good, do we even look at retrofitting them? Is there any value in retrofitting them as opposed to brand new ones? I'll leave that. We can leave that for another time. Let's not waste time today. I'll talk to you after. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Zola, Councillor Marsh.
Actually, Councillor Gazzola asked my questions, and yeah, I'm happy to take it offline at a later date, but it was very curious to me why all 15,000 didn't pass.
Okay, could I get, it's okay, Ms. McGolder. Could I get someone, I think we can move these all together, moved by Councillor Naitis, all three, building, golf, parking. Let's go in regular order. Councillor Schneider. Councillor Schneider.
Approve.
Okay, very good. Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
Opposed to all three?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you're doing the waterworks and all of that, right?
Sorry?
You're doing what are the three you're doing?
Building, golf, and parking. Those are the three that we need to approve, correct, Mr. Haggie?
No. Okay.
Through the chair,
Building,
all of the
golf, and-
enterprises and utilities will need to be approved.
Oh,
All of
I'm
them.
thinking. Sorry, I'm thinking rates. Yeah.
But we
Okay.
still need to set all of the, or still need to approve all of the budgets, so all 7
Correct.
budgets.
Yeah, correct. So, Councillor Schneider, I'm going to go. In the interest of expediency, instead of breaking them all out, could you just, when I go through, could you just indicate the ones, if you're any, which ones you're opposed to? So, Councillor Schneider, I'd go back to you again to approve all of these, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Approve all.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
No, I'm opposed to all of them for different reasons. So I'll take a negative vote on all of them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Michaud.
I approve all.
Thank you. Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
I'm in favor of all of them.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Support all.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
I support all of them.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Affirmative for all.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I support them all.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
I support them all.
And Mayor Verbenovich.
I support them all.
And I support all as well. Thank you. Okay.
May I ask? I'm sorry. May I ask a question on building accounts? I know you.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't really understand why we're sitting with such a large surplus in our building reserve. Have we overcharged on our building permit fees for Lord knows how many years? When I look at it, our building permit fees are in line with all of our neighbors, with all of the industry. So we've not been burdening the developers with the fees, and yet here we are after a number of years, we have a humongous surplus in those accounts. I would really like to understand, does that surplus belong to the building industry, or is that a part that should be part of the city's surplus. So I raised that question that perhaps staff could look at that. It's not an urgency for today, but I don't understand that. Maybe it's just my thick head, but I don't understand it. Thank you.
Mr. Reedman, do you want to reply?
Through the chair, so the building enterprise fees must be maintained within the building enterprise. They cannot be directed towards offsetting tax rates. We have consulted with our industry for a number of years to try and set appropriate fees. And so we have proposed a reduction in the fee for this year to help manage our building enterprise while adding some additional staff to support the volume of work that's coming through that division.
Okay, thank you. So let's see if we can move along now. Mr. Haggie.
Sure. Next up, if we can advance the slide a few, is the capital budget. Next slide, please. Just a summary of the capital budget and where all the information is included in the December 14th package. Just summary-wise, it has not been reproduced for final budget day, although there have been a few tweaks which are noted on the next slide, please. After budget was presented to council, or after it was prepared, there were a few items that came forward to council and that have been approved. So in the capital budget that council is approving, it's all of the information that was presented during capital, as well as these two items regarding the downtown grid and the resiliency grant funding for trails and bridges that were dealt with on December 7th. Next slide, please. There's a small number of issue papers that are being brought forward at council's request regarding small scale traffic calming, community trails, the capital pool, and fleet replacements. It's noted on this slide and in the issue papers themselves is that staff are not recommending any of the adjustments that are being requested or for follow-up information due to financial constraints or staffing restraints or other considerations that are noted in the individual issue papers. So that is it, Mr. Chair, as far as the presentation goes. So look to you for direction and discussion.
Certainly. So let's begin by going through the issue papers then. Any comments or questions on Final 45 BD02? Final 45 BD02, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Chair Davey. I'm just wondering, we have staff here to comment on this?
We do.
Okay. I guess my question is, because I'm looking at, when I look at this, the option number 2, which is 9,000, it's saying an additional 15. Are we talking about additional 15 signs throughout all the wards? Like so basically be 1, and then half the wards would get 5.
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, so there is already an increase rolled into the existing budget based on last year's direction from council, and so we are seeing an increase up to 112 flexible delineators, which is a 40% overall increase across the city. And so we weren't able to implement those this year with COVID restrictions. And so we actually do plan to roll those additional ones out. So option 2 would be another 15 in addition to that. And so based on the volume that's already proposed, staff aren't recommending any further increases at this time. There does become a point where it may become too much and become sort of sign pollution and people start to ignore them. But if we did extend beyond that with an additional 15, staff would recommend to be able to use those based on staff's direction citywide to make sure that we're managing problem locations on a citywide basis.
Okay, I guess because this is the one issue that I deal with continuously, and even with those ones that are allocated, the additional, I already got another 5 more streets that want these, and the problem is when you do have certain streets that we do put them on, and to spread these out, you put them on one sign on the street, and meanwhile the street could be a really big street, and then so there's ones lacking there. So I was just wondering if there's a way to add to the scale of these in regards to the bigger streets so that there is more than just one, because that's.
So through the chair, so based on the existing budget allocation, there's approval for up to 10 additional locations per ward plus 15 citywide. And so staff can work with the local councillor on whether, we add a few extra on one street versus, doing one on 10 individual locations. So, I'm confident that there's enough of an increase to sort of manage a bit more flexibly with councillors based on the existing budget that's already approved.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let it put it out there. I prefer option 3, but if I want to see what my colleagues are willing to invest in this as well, because again, this is something that is continuously my number one issue, and I feel like I don't feel like it'd be a dilution if we do put on more additional signs, but in particular, I would like to be able to have that capacity to be able to put, like, let's say McGarry in my ward, to put 2 instead of just putting 1, so I can stretch the sign to another street. And I find it defeats the purpose a little bit. So I'll let everyone go ahead and see where that lands.
Okay, Councillor Initis, I'll come back to you then to move that, or if you want to refine it to a different option, that'll be your prerogative as well. Apologies, I lost track of the order. I'm going to go by the order in the queue here. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification first for Councillor Initis' benefit. So for option number 3, where it outlines a $15,000 cost, and is that additional to the 8,700 annual thereafter for operations? So are we looking at about 23,000 plus or so of a cost?
Through the chair, so there is a one-time cost to purchase those, but so I think it would vary from year to year depending on, right, because this is based into an operating budget, I believe, and so.
So as a budget,
sorry, it is capital, and there is also, yes, there would be an actual increase on top of that.
Oh, I see. Okay, so fairly small. Okay, Mr. Chair, just a quick comment. I agree with the concerns laid out by Councillor Initis for the traffic calming. Many of us have some stretches of roadways that are much longer, and just 1 or 2 delineators don't effectively do much of anything. And if we address just one long street, that can eat up most of the signage the delineators that are available to us. And I think we need to have that flexibility to address those longer streets. And that's the issue. Those long stretch of roadways are the ones that have the most concerns related to them, because they provide a longer space for people to speed up. So I would support Councillor Initis on his advocation for option number 3. My question was on the additional funding for community trails. I see the report.
Sorry,
that,
Councillor Singh, we're not
Councillor
Singh, sorry, we're not at that. We're not at that issue paper yet. We have to deal with this. I have a bunch of people in the queue to talk on just the traffic on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were just asking questions of all the issue papers.
Oh,
so
no, we'll go through one by one. Yep, I'll note you though. Just again, for everyone in the queue, we're just going to talk about, in case I was unclear, we're just going to talk about this issue paper to start with, okay? Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to concur with Councillor Initis. This is probably one of the biggest concerns if I get emails or phone calls from constituents about traffic and speeding. We've done a really good job with delineators and traffic calming measures in our wards, and I hate to slow down this trajectory even more. I understand last, COVID 2020 kind of canceled everything, and we're going to play catch up, but it doesn't seem to me that it's enough. I disagree with the sign pollution. I think we're a long ways off from that. I think it could eventually be that way if we let it get there, but we've got a ways to go. And I would agree with Councillor Initis for option 3. I've got community groups in Ward 4 that actually work hard to calm traffic in their area. So they're taking the lead on things. And I think it's up to council to continue with this and not kind of slow things down. I realize that things are tight right now, but I think option 3 we should make this doable. And the other question I have is, it was mentioned that there's a staffing problem with getting these in. Can someone explain that to me?
Mr. Reedman?
Chair, and so if council members earlier in the pandemic, when we brought forward information related to temporary bike lanes and other components. Am I unmuted?
Oh, there you go. Yeah, just it was going up and down, Mr. Reedman, so maybe just a little closer to the microphone.
A little bit closer.
Yeah.
So earlier last year, when staff brought forward a staff report on temporary bicycle lanes, we did discuss that there was a delay last year due to COVID, that this was a program that wasn't fully redeployed. And so council had agreed to just rolling out the base level from the prior year. For this year, we plan to roll out further, including that additional 40% increase that's already built into the budget. But there will be staffing challenges the further we expand this. So we have a small crew that's in our operations team that are required to install these and then remove them at the end of the year. And so it does put pressures on our workforce during those periods. And I just want to be explicitly clear about the cost. So there's a one-time $15,000 capital cost with option 3, but there would be an ongoing annual cost of $8,750 to install and remove and replace those additional measures.
But we made those, yeah, okay. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you. I support Councillor Inez still for option 3.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to clarify something that Mr. Reedman, I believe, said earlier, which was that increase in signs that we had put into the budget for last year, those signs have been purchased, correct?
Through the chair, so I would have to double check that. I believe so, but yeah, part of the challenge was just our crews and based on the service level that we were trying to manage citywide, we had a sort of a labor shortage to be able to install.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Mr. Reedman, it was 3 per ward extra that was in the budget from last year. Is that correct?
Through the chair, so it's an additional 10 per ward plus 15 citywide that is in the budget from last year.
Okay, so an additional 10, or no, 10 in total.
Through the chair, I believe total. Let me just confirm with Mr. Cronkite.
Okay, well, if you can find that would be great, but I'll keep talking in the meantime. I wanted to say as well that this is the #1 issue in my ward on a consistent basis. So that's at least 3 councillors that have said that. And I'm sure that there's more that could say that dealing with seasonal traffic calming or dealing with traffic calming in general is that we deal with. Now that many residents have experienced having the flexi signs on their street, to move them at any point is very, very difficult, or at least I would find that difficult to move them. I know that some councillors choose different sites yearly. So be that as it may, when other residents see that Street A has got a flexi sign, they want a flexi sign as well. And I would also say that in terms of it becoming sign pollution, typically people travel on maybe the same set of roads on their kind of daily excursions, and then they get to maybe a more central road in their ward. I don't know that people are thinking that maybe that there's too many in the wards right now. I don't think so, and I do that it certainly is something that people really want. So I concur with the comments that have been made previously. What I would say is that I'm even interested in option 4. because if you look at that, that's approximately 50 additional flexi signs. That really only means an additional 5 more per ward. So if we're at 10 now, including what was in the budget for last year, that would only be 15 per ward. And I certainly can find 15 spots in my ward for those. If other councillors don't need their 15, I will gladly happy to have them share with me. That would be great. But I really don't feel that 15 per ward is too many. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Totally agree. Number one issue that we hear about. I love what Councillor Ioannidis said about being able to place more than one sign on a larger street. Our awesome traffic team explained in any traffic calming study when it's the information night that the goal is to keep the speed down the entire length of the street, not just in one section. So having that extra sign on some of these longer streets would be absolutely fantastic. So I'm definitely in support of this. I could go with number 3, but I also want to for in the future. Councillor Ioannidis had a great idea. I think he proposed earlier one time about maybe doing one less formal traffic calming project per year, and using the funding for more seasonal traffic calming issues. I know in my ward I've had a lot of residents take advantage of the Love My Hood resident-led traffic calming issue materials and things there. So anything we can do to increase the safety and decrease the speeds on our residential streets is great. I think these signs are a great indicator. They are actually a sign that we are doing something, and I know the residents appreciate it. I can tell you that along through my ward, they are effective. And I would like to see more of them. So whatever we can do to do that would be great. That the ultimate traffic calming measure will be when we're able to have more automatic speed enforcement cameras throughout our residential streets. That will do it. But until we get to that point, this is what we need to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gallo-Silac.
Yeah, well, I agree with the fact that speeding is a strong issue that we hear about a lot of the time. I'm not in support of any more measures at this point. I think we haven't had an opportunity to see what the impact is of the decisions we made last year because it wasn't able to be rolled out. And so I'm concerned that we haven't given it an opportunity to see what an additional signs are with the 40% increase. And so I can't, I'm not going to be supportive of moving forward with this initiative this year. I'm hoping and optimistic that we'll get all of that 40% increase installed this year, and then maybe next year we look at it again. But I think for this year, it's something that we should pass on, and that we should look at it maybe again next year.
Thank you, Mayor Verbenovich.
Thanks. I just have one question for staff before I make a comment, and I see this issue partially connected to where we're going with the 40-kilometer slow streets pilot and where things may go in that regard. And I'm just wondering where we're at with that, when we're expecting that to come back, because that's going to have a fairly, if we go ahead with it, and certainly, you know, I have been hopeful that we would. I mean, there will be an implementation cost associated with that, but that would also have an impact in neighborhoods.
Okay, sir, just before staff answers, Councillor Gallo-Silac, I have to step away for 1 second. I'm not sure if you can see, but Councillor Gazzola and Councillor Marsh have questions after Mayor Verbenovich is completed, okay?
Yep, I see that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, so maybe I'll just confirm, Councillor Johnson had asked about the total number of locations, and so that 40% increase is for 10 locations in total in each, plus those additional 12 locations citywide.
Mr. Reedman, you're going to have to say that again. For some reason, your mic's going up and down, so I don't know what, but we couldn't hear the numbers that you were giving.
All right, yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. I don't usually have issues with my microphone. Maybe I'll go into the settings after this. So just confirming from Councillor Johnson's question is that the 40% increase is for 10 locations per ward, and then there's the 12 citywide. In terms of the slow streets, that was scheduled to come back in the spring, but there has been some changes to traffic patterns due to COVID and the number of people that are driving. And so that is something that I would like to just confirm with transportation staff on, is making sure that we have accurate data to reflect that. We also have our Vision Zero report coming back at the end of 2021.
Okay, so just briefly, I will support the request for additional ones. I do know that in talking with ward councillors, this is probably the most significant, if not close to the most significant issue that folks throughout the city regularly hear about. And from time to time, I hear about as well as people get frustrated. I will say that I also have seen throughout the last 10 months, people's driving habits get worse. People are speeding more. I know that we've seen more stunt driving in the city that police are trying to address. Obviously, that doesn't typically happen on residential streets as much as it does on regional roads. But I think this is an area, and it's pretty clear to me. And I'm continuing our advocacy, and we're continuing pushing at the region. But it's going to be some time before we see significantly more speed enforcement cameras, and this is an easy way to address it. If it means hiring, an additional or one or two seasonal people that do this and other work, then that may be part of the implementation that needs to be looked at as part of this going forward. The other thing that I think and ward councillors may want to consider as part of this is maybe it's used for delineators, but maybe there's some other things, like some of the stuff that we're doing through the community-led stuff through Love My Hood. So maybe it's lawn signs. Maybe we work with the police department and say, instead of getting rid of an old vehicle, let us have it and be able to move it around town and put up a cardboard police office. It's worked in other cities as a way of, again, getting people to slow down. So I think there's a variety of tools we can still potentially use, and in consultation with council, these dollars could potentially be used to assist with some of that.
Thank you. We will now move on to Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, just a brief comment. I can concur with what everyone says, that this is a problem that's on everybody's lips, and it's a continuous, has been one of the major problems, because we all know that we all speed, and I'm as guilty as the next person, unfortunately. But having said that, I want to stick to this year's theme. The 2021 budget is one of fiscal restraint. I believe a 40% increase for this year is sufficient at this time without adding more. So I will support option 1 as put out by staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we really do need more traffic calming. These flexible delineators in certain locations especially have been so effective. It's really something that I value, and that I know our residents value. And we do have, as one of our 5 top priorities, pedestrian-friendly transportation, and these flexible delineators, while they're for vehicle traffic, they ultimately helping traffic to slow down so that we can avoid collisions, so that we can avoid collisions that might impact pedestrians especially. So this is something that I think residents want, that we should support. So in terms of option 3, I think that having 12 per ward plus an additional amount that staff can determine in terms of our metrics what where would be the most effective might be the way to go. So I support option 3, but I agree with Mayor Verbanovic that perhaps we need to reduce the actual number and look at whether or not we have staff add to the mix or add other measures for traffic calming. So I approve of the budget for option 3, but perhaps would defer to staff for the actual whether it's just 20 more signs or 25.
Okay, thank you. Going back to Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. CLOC. I guess my question is, I'm just wondering with staff from if whether or not there's a way to maybe alleviate some of the dollar concerns with the budget and maybe earmarking a certain amount of Love My Hood funding, an additional amount, or maybe just a little bit more in there. Just wanted to see whether that's a possibility or not. And that'd be with the staff as well.
Through the chair, so I would have to defer to Mr. May to talk specifically about Love My Hood, but maybe I'll start off by saying the staff that are installing these are actually operations staff that need to, drill holes and pull them into the ground and making sure that they're, not damaging other infrastructure. And so, I think it's very important that we utilize the right staff to be able to install and remove these measures. And so, I think adding other ideas for traffic calming, like without having a comprehensive discussion with staff, like we did bring forward a series of temporary or other traffic calming measures that we could look at exploring. And so there was a broad suite of ideas there a few years ago. And so, on the fly, I don't think I can sort of recommend other solutions at this point in time, but I think we just need to be cognizant of which staff are doing, what works based on union requirements and the skill set that's required.
Okay. So what I'm thinking now is instead of just maybe not a number of signs, but maybe rather I see for option 3, like have the $15,000 and then the annual. I'm wondering whether or not, because I really want to see additional signs on those main roads of each ward that have those long roads that have that. I think that is we have to do at a minimum. But what I experienced this summer was, I guess, I'm not sure if everyone had seen the video where the one resident almost got hit by a car twice, and I know there were some suggestions, and I've seen it in the city of Cambridge where there was the medium in the middle of the road. They had the sign, but also at the end they also had those little thinner posts, delineators, and to me that really seemed really effective, and that's something I would want to see on the certain roads that are having difficulties in other areas as well, not just rather in the area I represent. So I'm just thinking maybe give a number, what instead of giving a specific this many signs or anything would be beneficial.
And what would that, are you asking staff that?
Yeah, I'm asking staff that because I'm looking at here, I'm thinking I want to go somewhere between option 3 and 4. I'm thinking maybe 20,000, but it could be less. So I want to pass make sure we pass that amount, but I want to be able to achieve those results that I'm referring to.
Mr. Reedman, did you have an answer?
Through the chair. So what I can say is staff typically work with members of council on those ward location ones. And so I think that's something that can be discussed on how the layout looks like and what the impacts are for the number of signs. And so I know there is signage in Councillor Snyder's ward where there's actually some flexible delineators that are brought in to help manage that roadway. So I think it's, staff do work with council on these measures. And so I think, that's an understanding moving forward into 2021.
Okay, so, all right, well, I'll just stick with the 15,000 for now on option 3.
Okay, that looks like that's all the comments that we had. So we're looking, Councillor Ioannidis has moved the option number 3. We will have a recorded vote on that. We'll start with Mayor Verbanovich.
I'll support it.
Councillor Marsh,
I support.
Councillor Chapman,
I support it.
Councillor Johnston,
Affirmative.
Councillor Ioannidis,
In favor.
Councillor Singh,
In favor?
Councillor Michel,
In favor.
Councillor Gazzola,
Opposed?
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
I don't think Councillor Daly's back yet.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
I
you
know-
are?
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Okay. And I am opposed, but that carries. And then I turn it back to you, Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much. Let's get through the next one, and then maybe we'll take a 5-minute stretch break afterwards. This is BDO 3, the community trails item. I believe Councillor Singh was ready to speak to this one. Go ahead, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the question I had, I appreciate staff in compiling this issue paper or the report, giving us a bit of an insight of, how this would compile with the cycling and trails master plan. And so my question is, in the additional meters, staff have it outlined as starting 2022. If council were to support this, why would the delay be into 2022 as opposed to into 2021 for the funding?
So through the chair, the issue paper outlines that we have no staff capacity to complete these works in 2021. Usually there's a design component and then a construction year associated with these types of projects. And so we would start to plan in 2021 for works in 2022. But the reality is that staff were already fully allocated prior to the stimulus funding. And since then, we've added an additional 2.6 kilometers of trail through the stimulus funding. So from a staffing resource perspective, there is no capacity in 2021.
And as you might recall, the emphasis of the comments I had made through the budget, as favorable as I am in broadening our trails network and bringing in more kilometers to what we have already, was the further enhancements to our existing trails, and that's a considerable body of work that still would be pending, even if you were to meet all that's already laid out as part of the cycling and trails master plan. If this extra funding allocation were to be more focused towards asphalting and winter maintaining, although this is not a lot, it won't be many kilometers, or we're talking about in the hundreds of meters, but still in key areas, linkages to schools could still hugely benefit some neighborhoods. Could this meet that, where you don't need a lot of staffing because we already have the trails as more aspect of a as a contract of it being asphalted, and then I guess for operations of winter maintained?
Yeah, so through the chair, even with upgrading existing trails, there is still a design element, making sure you have the right base, managing contracts, and so there is still a staffing impact. And I also just want to point to the majority of the monies with provision are currently going to trail upgrades. So that is, to your point, that is a significant component of the Cycling and Trails Master Plan, and we know that we have to invest in upgrading our trail portions to provide year-round accessibility.
And so in the budget paper, it outlines staff recommendation for hiring or converting the part-time or contract position to full-time. That won't add any extra capacity, or?
No, that staff time is that is the staff resource that is being allocated for the existing capital budget, the trails and bridge work, as well as the stimulus funding.
Okay, just as quickly as a summary. So even if council were to support one of these options, that work would start in 2022. And the report also expresses that this might require reduction to another project, but that's only to say if there's zero budget impact, that we're specifying this additional investment to the trail without having a direct correlation to the budget, correct? But if there's an increase to the capital pool through a budget implication, then other projects would not be impacted. Am I correct in that?
When we expand a capital program, normally there's either normally there's growth monies associated with that. At this point, we would be, if we were looking to make room within the capital budget, we would need to look at what would need to be reduced unless we have another funding source to add into the total capital pool.
And the future increase to the budget would add that extra capacity to the pool, would it not? So as an example, if council were to assume for say option, just throw it out there, option 2, which might be a 0.085% of a budget implication, again, 0.08. But that would be into the 2022 year budget, correct?
Correct.
Or would that be into 2021?
That would be a 2022 impact.
2022. So if council were to make so does council really need to make a decision as part of 2021? Or is this a good issue paper for us to table and then, because we're not doing anything now, and then revisit this in 2022? Or would staff benefit if there's inclination on, the majority of council to support this direction and giving this indication now so that it's already built into the base budget for 2022? What would be the preference of staff?
I think the challenge is fitting it in within the capital envelope available. So we would need to look, and I would look to Mr. Lautenbach to provide more feedback or guidance to council around this. But if we receive direction to build this into the 10-year forecast, that's what council's approving today, is the 10-year forecast. And so that would be a challenge. Next year we could revisit, and certainly through the discussion we could look to see at how can we look towards these options next year, make sure we build it in. But I would look to Mr. Lautenbach for his guidance here.
So through the chair, if it was something that council moved forward with today, we would have to either draw additional funds from reserves, and as I highlighted at the start, we are seeing limited financial capacity right now in some of the capital reserves. So although it would be reflected in the 10-year forecast, that would be the only way that we could move it ahead today to reflect it. Otherwise, as Mr. McGoldrick has indicated, we would need to really go through each project within the capital forecast and decide, is there a trade-off in terms of, something that might not happen in order to expand this. Typically, when we do expand programs, we try to utilize other means and timing of different things. So whether it might be gas tax indexing, which happens every 5 years, which provides a little more capacity within the capital program, or other grant opportunities that come forward, very similar to the Brazilian stream funding, where we prioritized, our trails to proceed. We do look at those opportunities as to try to expand the program. When we don't have that, and when we're in the situation today, it's a bit more challenging, and really we would only have reserves to be able to draw and reflect in terms of that forecast. So if it is something,
and I think that's where my confusion lies. I'm sorry, complete. So we finish.
So if it's something that you wanted to see reflected every year through the budget process, we do obviously take direction from council in terms of trying to prioritize different things and as it's reflected within the budget. And that might provide another opportunity for us to look at some of either those trade-offs, or potentially if there's additional funding that is received between now and then in terms of capital funding, that could provide some more capacity at that time.
Sorry, Councillor Singh. Mr. Chapman, do you want to add?
I'll try and simplify it, Councillor Singh. If you wanted certainty today that those funds will be in place, because this is a high priority for council, where I think you were going is that you would make a levy allocation in the 2021 budget to increase the capital pool. And that would guarantee that the funding is in place. Staff can know that this is a priority, work will proceed. The other alternative is to refer to the 2022 budget as you've suggested, and then staff will look at options to bring back for council consideration, but there's no guarantee at that point that it would be funded. And so really, I think it comes down to how important it is for council to have a firm commitment in the 2022 budget at this point in time.
Hey, sorry, Councillor Singh, if I can just interject for one quick second, it might help us then to, I don't know if staff has those numbers ready, but to know what the levy impact would be for options 1, 2, and 3. I know some of us can do the math, but just to get staff to confirm. Sorry, Councillor Singh, continue.
Yeah, so just to throw it out there, it's 0.03 for option 1 and 0.085% for option 2, but staff can confirm that. Okay, so those are the two options I'm looking at, either adding into the base budget through a levy increase by those amounts, if it's option 2 is what I'm more inclined, or perhaps even just referring to staff to try to build this into the base budget for 2022. Look to see if other members of council have questions, and then I'll decide from there. Thanks.
There's no one else in the queue, Councillor Singh, but if it is that first amount's relatively inconsequential, I would certainly support option, maybe half and half, maybe we do option 1 at this time. So there's some allocation in there, and then refer the balance of it for option 2 to future years, is if you're looking for the thoughts of other members of council. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I like the way where this is going with Councillor Singh, but I would like to see commitment as well in 2022, because I feel like a lot of the focus was on cycling, and this portion of the cycling and trails and all that stuff could have been a little more beefed up. So I am in support of in any direction that Councillor Singh wishes to move forward with this.
Mayor Verbenovich.
Sorry, thanks, Chair Davey. One of the questions I have, Ms. McGoldrick, and I know staff are pretty jammed up right now in terms of the workload, but I'm wondering if there's portions of the workload that they're doing that could be complemented by, and I know we've sort of this past year, because of COVID, haven't hired as many co-ops as we traditionally have. I'm wondering if there's a scenario where we could potentially hire some co-ops from one of many institutions. I want to make sure I'm very general here, so I don't create any problems for anyone. But that could, in fact, work with our staff, even starting this year, to get some of that design work done, and maybe see some of these pieces happening sooner rather than later.
So through the chair to the mayor, we are looking at temporary resources to help support the significant workload this year. We have the backlog of the 2020 capital program plus the 2021 program, which for parks, we did not defer a significant amount of work. So it's essentially 2 years worth of work in 1 year. And so, yes, we are going to be leaning on temporary resources and are currently working through the resourcing plan. But your suggestions noted, Mayor.
Okay, great. And I think that's because I also think it's always important to try to give young people an opportunity to think about careers in the public sector, and so it would be a good way of approaching it, because this is also an area that I think will likely continue to see prioritization from the government in post-pandemic stimulus, because it aligns up with their values around sustainability. And it's also an easy way to get quick projects happening and people working, more so than some of the other kinds of stimulus projects that take a little more pre-planning and work. So I think we want to make sure we're as ready as we can be on that front.
Okay, that concludes everyone that has questions or comments. So I'm not sure where we're left. Oh, Mr. Haggie, did you have numbers for us to confirm?
I do. Yes, I've been calculating in the background. So for option one, it's essentially the addition of the capital amount in 2022 and the operating amount. So for option one, it's about $46,000 in total, which is 0.04%. Option two is around $115,000, which is 0.09. And option three is about $230,000 or 0.18 on the tax rate.
Okay, that certainly helps. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for other members of council of having their questions and comments, and helps to inform me in kind of the direction to go. And I liked, and I was kind of considering that same suggestion that Councillor Davey that you mentioned, because there's not anything that could be done in 2021. At the same time, I personally, for me, it's very important to see some sort of initiative that we do earmark something and expressing to staff that this is a priority to this council. So for option one to be included into as into the levy, so earmarks definitive dollars, and then further refer to staff in consideration of option 2 or 3, and seeing if that can be brought into the 2022. And obviously staff can go forward with some of the suggestions given, and seeing how can we look at some other resources in planning this work through perhaps even co-op, or especially at the same time as Mayor Vanovic kind of alluded, that there's good appetite from higher orders of government, the province and the feds, to perhaps look at projects such as these that have significant community improvement aspects to them, and where we have some sort of funding or priority given, it I think allows us to be better suited to leverage and kickstart those projects quicker than sooner than later. So that would be my motion, Mr. Chair, to encourage council to support option 1 as into the base 2021 budget, and then also refer to staff in looking at option 2 and 3 in encouragement and broadening that, and looking it into the base budget for 2022.
Very good. So moved. So again, recorded votes on everything. If everyone's ready, we'll start with Mayor Rabinovich.
Support.
Councillor Marsh. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Marsh. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought my shortcut key worked. It didn't. I support.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Or
Councillor Johnson. Come back to Councillor Johnson. Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Singh.
Very much in favor.
Councillor Gallery-Sealock.
I'm opposed.
Councillor Michaud.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Gazzola.
In support of staff recommendation and therefore opposed.
Opposed. Very okay. Thank you. Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
I'm in favor as well. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson, are you here? She's not here. We'll have to move along, but that does pass. I'm sure she would have supported, and she'll have the opportunity to support, I suppose, at the end of the day. Okay, with that, let's. I promised that we're going to take a couple more stretch breaks this budget, so let's take a stretch break right now. My clock says 2:31. Let's try and be here by 2:40. Okay, 2:40. Okay, thanks everyone.
Mr. Chair, I'm here. I just will have to have my video off for a bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. We will get started in just a second here. Hopefully everyone's back. Okay, if we're good to go, Mr. Clerk or Madam Clerk, let me know.
We're good to go.
Okay, very good. So let's continue. There are two more issue papers. I really see them as more for information. If anyone had any questions on BDO 4 or BDO 5, you could ask now. I'm not seeing any, and there's no action required. So we'll move on to the operating budget. And Mr. Haggie, you can walk us through these slides.
Sure, Mr. Chair. If you can just advance the slide deck, please. Again, please. So for operating, there's, again, just a summary of what was discussed in the operating package and where to find kind of the highlights from it by section. Next slide, please. Like in operating, or like in capital, the operating does have a few issue papers that are being brought forward. Just to note about the Huron-Brigadoon Community Center one, that was one that was requested. It does, based on the information staff has now, as opposed to when the budget was being developed, it does appear that we do not need that funding in 2021. It could be deferred to 2022. But again, that would cause an automatic increase in 2022, just so council's aware. The other items are there for council's awareness and discussion as well. But I'll leave it at that. I believe that's the end of the operating section. Yes, it's the issue papers then.
Okay, very good. So we will begin with the first issue paper then, which is on the Huron-Brigadoon Community Center. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yes, I had requested this issue paper. It's not always something that I am encouraged to do to decrease support for an area of Ward 5, but I think it makes sense in the fiscal times that we have that I would be happy to move staff's recommendation to delay the funding for the Huron-Brigadoon Community Center till 2022.
Okay, very good. I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue on this, so I will. Councillor Gazzola, did you have a question? Go ahead. Your hand didn't go up, that's all.
I'm sorry, I had to find the unmute button. What does Councillor Galloway's recommendation mean? Does that mean that our expenditures will go down by that amount for this year? Is that correct?
Correct. So the levy would drop by that amount.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. So recorded vote on that then, beginning with Councillor Schneider.
I support.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
In support.
Councillor Michaud.
In support.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
In favor.
Councillor Singh.
In support.
Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Johnson.
In favor.
Councillor Chapman.
In favor.
Councillor Marsh.
In favor.
Mayor Verbenovich.
Support.
And I support as well. Very good. Okay, and any questions on BDO 7? BDO 7, Councillor Singh on this?
No, sorry, I think I had my hand up from before. Thank you.
Oh, okay, no problem. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I was disappointed to hear that we are unable to increase our capacity for this program for 2021. But I'd really like to see staff find, if not through our existing relationship with the working center, then through another means, I'd like to see us increase this capacity because the need is really only going to increase. Quite frankly, I feel that the city we are not doing as well as we could be when it comes to responding to the need to make sure our sidewalks are all clear. This was a great program. This is, I should say, continues to be a great program, and I look forward to supporting it going forward. But in lieu of this being an option for 2021, I have an alternative motion. So can I propose that now?
Please.
So right now we are relying on proactive enforcement in conjunction with the existing model that we've had for years, which was complaint-based. And so we have right now 4 active proactive bylaw enforcement officers. As far as I understand it, these are contract staff that are contracted for 5 months of the year, and they are full-time. And last year, they were able to inspect about 2,300? I think it's about 23,000 locations. Perhaps I'll ask staff to confirm that. But I feel that we need to really improve our game. If this is the way that council as a whole is looking to make sure that we have cleared sidewalks, then I feel that we should double our efforts. If we can do that for this season, having talked to staff about this earlier, we pay all costs included, not just salary, but uniform, cell phone, etc. It's $6,500 per month per employee. So if we were able to employ 4 more staff to get out there and enforce the sidewalks snow clearing bylaw, that would mean for the remainder of the year, that would, let's say for up to 2 more months, that would be a total of 8 months at $6,500, which is $52,000. So all that to say that we increased the sidewalk, the budget by $52,000 in 2021 in order to hire an additional 4 staff members.
Sorry, just writing things down. Okay, thank you. Might need to come back to you for some clarification. Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Next, I had Councillor Johnson in the queue.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to support Councillor Marsh in this. I know that we're this year in COVID, I think it's really important that we ensure as much as possible that our sidewalks are cleared. More and more people are out walking on a daily basis, which is great. It's wonderful to see. And it's important that the sidewalks are cleared. I know I didn't support us doing it as a city, but I think that we need to make sure as much as possible that the residents are doing this. I mean, I think about this really in times of COVID, that it's very important that the sidewalks are cleared so that we keep our emergency rooms clear of people fallen and broken a wrist or injured a knee, or anything that will help to keep our community safe and keep people out of the hospital, I think is really important. Not to mention, obviously, the impact that it has on people just being able to get around safely in the neighborhood. So I'm 100% supportive. And Councillor Marsh, if you need a seconder on that, I would be happy to support you in that.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. And just to give staff a heads up too, so they can prepare, I just need confirmation on if this is approved, what the impacts would be for next year's budget. And I'd also like to see what the levy's at now with what's been approved and this proposed. Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just looking at this report from August 31st, 2020. And on page 1-15, which I presume you don't have in front of you, but in the last paragraph, there's a comment that says, After 2 seasons of pilots, it does not appear that proactive bylaw enforcement is able to reduce the number of complaints or address chronic problem areas. So I just want to get feedback on staff on how to interpret that. And is it true, if my interpretation is correct, that by having more proactive bylaw enforcement is not necessarily going to accomplish what we would like to see it accomplish?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what I can confirm is that Councillor Marsh's numbers were correct. Last year, we inspected about 23,000 properties. A huge number of them, a vast majority of them, once they received the first inspection notice, did not go to a final fine, which means that they did clear their sidewalks following that first notice.
Okay, Councillor Chapman.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, Mayor Rabinovich.
Thanks, and thanks to Councillor Marsh for raising this. I mean, this is an issue that continues to be important to residents in our community, and I think the suggestion is a good one. I guess what I'm wondering though is what the reality is of getting those folks hired, because I know it takes time for us to get people hired and trained. And so I'm wondering we would get any benefit this winter yet, because I'm thinking it probably is going to take like 2 months at least, but maybe I'm wrong. And if that's not the case, could we look at this as something to add in for the tail end of the year now, which would then have a lesser impact on the 2021 budget, and then obviously it would become a first draw on the 2022 budget.
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's likely that if all went well, we could have them hired, trained, and on the streets sometime in early to mid-March, which does align, I believe, with the 2 months that Councillor Marsh has proposed, so that we would have salary for these 4 individuals for March and April, which is generally the period that we enforce.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess from a snow point of view, I mean, we generally don't get very much of any snow in April. I mean, there's been the odd exception. So it sounds like it would at best maybe get 3 or 4 weeks this year.
So through you, Mr. Chair, last year we did enforce in April. That's where that number came from. I would also note that when these particular officers are not enforcing the sidewalk clearing bylaw, they're enforcing our dog designation bylaw. And as council will remember, that's an issue which we perennial need to do more in terms of bylaw enforcement.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. I just need to understand the implications. Like, I understand there's a $52,000 figure which adds to the budget this year. What is the automatic, I guess, integration ask for 2022 and beyond?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not quite clear on this point, so perhaps Councillor Marsh can clarify. But if the intention is to make these employees permanent on a year-over-year basis, you'd have a $52,000 impact this year. You would also have to have a $78,000 impact in 2022.
Okay, thank you. There are others in the queue now. I'll go to them. First is Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Sorry, I thought I had raised my hand. Apparently, I didn't. I want to go back to the point that Mr. May made with regards to if they're not enforcing sidewalks, they're enforcing dog designation. Are we getting to all the complaints that we have from bylaw with regards to snow sidewalk issues?
The period of time where, and it's not dog designation, that's my mistake, it's dog licensing, just to be clear. The period of there are periods of time over the winter where there is no snowfall or ice accumulation, in which case they have nothing to enforce. And that's when we assign them to look at the dog licensing.
Okay, but are we getting to all the complaints that are coming in?
I don't have that with me, but I could certainly get that information and get back to council.
Well, I think that's an important point, because why would we hire 4 more people if we are getting to all the complaints that we need? And
so sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I could clarify, this isn't about responding to complaints, is my understanding. This is the proactive program. And so, no, we're not getting to all of the sidewalks in the city, I can tell you that. So this is not responding to complaints.
I'm just concerned that we're spending this, that we're looking at this at the last minute. I have some concerns with that. I would prefer for a report to come back on this issue sometime in between now and the next budget, because I don't think we're going to get a big bang for a buck this year. So I won't support it, but I may look at it if we were to bring a report back sometime between now and next budget.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I just want to follow up where Councillor Galloway-Sealock is going. I agree with her approach. I know when the motion failed to clear all sidewalks there by the city, that there were a lot of people were deeply concerned, and I do feel for those people that need to have clear sidewalks. So I believe we need to do everything we can to deal with this issue. But coming along here, at this time and hiring staff for a little more than a month, it seems really seems to be a knee-jerk reaction. I would rather hear what is happening now. I know I've had a number of issues that I've dealt with our bylaw people, and they seem to be dealing with them very, very quickly and all that. So it seems to be working with the amount of staff that we have. So before we approve spending more money, we really need to take a good look, a review. I think times have changed with snow clearing. People are much more aware of it. People are dealing with it much faster. So let's wait until the end of this year. And the bad season for this year is well behind us, or a good part of it. So for the sake of a few weeks in March and a little bit of time in April, I don't believe this is something we should be dealing with at this time. Bring back a report next summer and we can look at it for next year, but leave things alone as staff have recommended, basically, for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate where Councillor Marsh is coming from. There is absolutely more desire in the community to see proactive enforcement, but I think points have already been made by the members of council that with the timing currently, it just won't give us any direct benefit or any significant benefit, at least in 2021. Mid-March, we're looking at 1 month period of potential snowfall. There isn't much of snowfall after mid-April, so we're looking at probably 1 or 2 snowfalls. Again, proactive measure enforcement will only occur on large snowfall events, which typically don't happen in that time frame. So as it's already been said by others, I perhaps would like to see a more encompassing report that includes 2 years of reporting. So far we only have data for 1 year. Going into 2022, I think we would have a lot more information based on the proactive enforcement, on the level of resource that's within the bylaw department. How where are the shortfalls, and is there an absolute need to go ahead with these extra 4 hires and have that as a permanent complement going forward? but I think there's a lot of information that needs to be looked at before we can make that overarching kind of opinion. So I would, if you would allow, I would like to amend this to refer this to 2022 budget. And I think that would be the right time. And that would give staff appropriate amount of time to, to prepare a report that could give us the necessary information to make an informed decision for next year.
Okay, I will take that amendment. We're next to Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do agree with Councillor Marsh's motion that she brought forward also. However, listening to all the other comments, I am leaning towards looking at this for next year. It might be a little too late for this, but I honestly don't know how we can manage this city with four bylaw people looking at and answering calls for houses. It seems kind of ridiculous, actually. I think 8 would be a minimum of what we should have to cover this city if we're going to make a commitment. And I think this conversation might be better to have for next year.
Okay, thank you. I'll put my comments in before we go for a second round, then back to Councillor Marsh. I think Councillor Marsh has definitely raised an important point. I don't think we need to continually look at this, and she's doing what she can to try and represent that here. I do think it's actually appropriate, though, that we do refer it. We're not voting against it now, but we refer it to next year's budget so we can make sure that it is we're taking it in the proper context. By my calculation, we've already deferred about 0.5% of items that we're going to have to be adding to the 2022 budget between the Huron-Brigadoon Community Centre, the library, and the additional trails. So we're already putting additional pressures on it, and I think it's more appropriate to take this in the context of everything else. And also, by that time, we'll have the benefit of knowing exactly how bad COVID has affected us for the year coming up. So I think it's something we definitely need to look at, but I think we need staff to come back with a formal report and make the better decision then. So we'll go to Mayor Urbanovic, and then I'll finish off with Councillor Marsh.
Thanks very much. And, as I said earlier, I'm appreciative of the fact that Councillor Marsh has brought this forward. I think looking at a different timing does make sense. However, I'm not supportive of the timing that Councillor Singh has talked about, because that would only actually put us back in the same situation we're in now, but only a year from now. So we would be talking about it in January, and if we approved it, we wouldn't then be in a we'd be in a world where we wouldn't actually be hiring these people until March and so on. So I think if Councillor Marsh, depending on if she's proceeding with her existing motion or changes it, I think it may make more sense for this to actually come as a report partway through the year, and which is essentially referring to it as Councillor Singh has indicated. But what it would do is, if in fact this is the direction we proceed as part of that report, we could implement it starting in mid-November, when we would normally have these people on board for, and then presumably any costs associated with hiring and staffing them would have to come out of other operating funds or tax stabilization for the balance of 2021, if we were to go ahead with it at that point in time, and then be that first draw on the 2022 budget.
Very good, good catch. And Councillor Marsh?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if Mr. May has any additional information regarding Councillor Galloway-Sealock's question about how are we handling the complaints now? Are we able to keep up?
Mr. May?
Yes, I understand with the staff contingent we have now, we're able to keep up with the complaints.
Okay, and so so that's good news. And I mean, I think that yes, I agree. I appreciate everyone's concerns about this being a last minute, and it is really just sending out a line of hope to try to get us in a better situation when it comes to sidewalk snow clearing. in all fairness, I wasn't able to fully read this budget issue paper until this weekend, because this is something that came to us just last week, and so I had hoped that would be something that we support, but because we cannot, I was trying to think of other ways to improve the situation. Now, if we put a rush, and Mr. May, this is a question coming back to you, if we were to put a rush on the hiring process and prioritize this, because pedestrian-friendly transportation is one of our top priorities, can we potentially see additional staff members hired earlier than mid-March? Could we potentially see it by mid-February or end of February?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in my experience of recruiting, that would be unrealistic. I think a early March would be an aggressive timeline.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I still am hopeful that that if we had staff members come in 2021, that it would be that it would at least alleviate the problems that we have. I'm really disappointed in the amount of sidewalks that are not cleared throughout the city every time we have a snowfall, and especially a couple weekends ago with the icy, very heavy slushy and then frozen snow that we had. It was treacherous, and it's just not good enough. So I recognize this is not ideal, but neither are our sidewalks. And so I would like to still propose that we do this. I think that 52,000 is a large number compared to what we would end up spending, because if indeed Mr. May's prediction is correct, which we fully trust in staff's experience, then it really would just be for 1 month. But I'd like still to be have this put forward, because 1 month of proactive enforcement is better than no months. So I'm still putting it forward, and I'll add an amendment just to say yes, that we direct staff to come back with a report within this calendar year, but in enough time that we can add to the 2022 budget and direct staff to hire 4 additional staff people for the following snow season. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, so I will go back to Councillor Singh in a second, but just to clarify, then it might be taken best then as 2 separate motions. So the first being to implement as soon as possible, and the second being that staff come back with a report. Is that okay? I'm seeing you nodding. Okay, very good. I'll come back to you, Councillor Singh, if you're okay with that, but I have Councillor Johnson in the interim.
Yes, thank you, and I will. I again concur with Councillor Marsh. It is disappointing. I'm out every day with a few times a day with my dog, and like I said, I've been thinking, my goodness, if people fall, this is not a time when we want to be having those sprains and breaks, etc., going to the emergency room while we're dealing with COVID. And again, I don't want that happening at any time, just to be clear. But yeah, I do agree with Councillor Marsh, so I will be supporting you. I have a little different twist on this, Councillor Davey, not with regards to Councillor Marsh's motion. Do we need to deal with that, or should we deal with all the kind of snow removal pieces all at the same time?
Why don't you explain your proposal, and then we'll figure it out from there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So my concern is with the working center and their capacity. As we know, we had bumped up from 175 to 200 residents that would be able to access the working center for people that were unable to clear their snow, and also met an income threshold. And I believe that we have used that up. I was very glad that when a resident contacted me 2 weeks ago who had had a recent amputation and had received a notice about getting their sidewalks cleaned, that we were able to help them. I'm concerned that when we have emergency things like that come up now, we won't have anybody there in place. I know that the working center, that they don't have capacity to do that. What are we able to do for other people? I know that we were to keep a list of people that were on a waiting list. So I'm wondering if we can comment on that. And if there is any money that we can find to maybe hire other contractors.
Just to provide an update in terms of the demand for the assisted services program, we 20 individuals on the wait list. As council's aware, we currently have 175 spots with 20 people on the wait list. 15, there is capacity for 15 additional spots. Those were the spots that were being held for bylaw enforcement to be filled through those that come forward through that process, that similar to what Councillor Johnson just described. So that's how we were able to allocate that spot for that individual in that circumstance. Because we're, progressing through the winter season, we do want to make sure all spots are fully utilized. And so we'll be looking to allocate the remaining available spots sometime by the end of the month. And so at the end, depending on how many additional requests come forward at this point, we would have a demand of individuals that are unmet at this point.
Can I just ask a follow-up then as well? I'm sorry. So I thought you said we had 20 people on the waiting list right now, and that we're hoping to be able to accommodate them. I'm sorry, you kind of cut in and out there, so I want to make sure I heard that correctly.
So that's correct. We have 20 currently on the wait list, but we've held back, as described previously to council, 15 spots for the bylaw enforcement process. And so we can allocate those 15 spots and at this point meet the demand with the exception of 5 individuals that are on the list.
Okay, yeah, and that's at this point halfway through January. So we still have, at least 2.5 months of winter to go through. So I think that will be an item certainly that we'll need to talk about then for the 2022 budget. Thank you.
And you're welcome. And just to add, for 2022, as per council's direction through the winter sidewalk maintenance report that came back, we'll be increasing these spots available by an additional 75. So looking at 250 spots for winter of 2021-22 next winter.
Okay, very good. And Councillor Singh.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, as Councillor Marsh is proceeding forward with her, I'll just, I guess, edit my amendment as per Mayor Baranowicz's suggestion that the report come at least before September. That should give ample time for staff, depending on the time that they need to compile the report. But it'd be, I think, sufficient time for them to be able to present to the council, and council supports it. There's ample time for appropriate staff persons to be hired before that mid-November timeline that we would need them for. So I'll amend it for a report to come before September with the comprehensive information of proactive enforcement from 2020 and 2021.
Okay, and sorry, Councillor Singh, I believe that's just going to be the second portion of maybe your micro's off or something. But that's going to be the second portion of Councillor Marsh's motion effectively. So we're going to take 2 votes. The first vote is going to be on implementing it now with the levy impact, hoping to start mid-March. And the second then we're going to take a second vote on whether that passes or fails for staff to come back sometime before that November timeframe, early
Yeah, I'm
enough.
good with that.
Yeah, okay.
Doesn't
very
matter,
good.
you know, that's the intent that I'm pushing for, rather than us hiring for mid-March period, which I don't think is, I've already made those comments. I don't think that's sufficient time for us to really accomplish much of anything.
Okay, very good. Mr. Haggy, comment?
There was a question earlier about any of the levy impacts. So anytime you have one of those, if you want to throw to me whenever you want the information, I can get it for you. The $52,000 impact works out to 0.04%. And the 78,000 is roughly 0.06, which would be a hit on 2022. So currently, based on what has happened, we're sitting at 0.094. So just the increase related to the community trails. And then if this were to go through, we would be at 0.98.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to take these votes actually separately just for clarity. So the first thing we're voting on, council, is to implement this as soon as possible, targeting mid-March timeframe. Okay, so we will go in reverse order.
Mr. Chair, sorry
yeah.
to interrupt. I have forwarded the motion that has two parts to it, and I wonder if staff could just put it up.
Can staff do that? I can read them as well, or you can read them, Councillor Marsh.
We can put them up for you if you'd like. Just give us 1 moment.
Yeah, no problem. Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll give everyone 1 second to review. We're going to vote on item number 1 first. Okay, reverse order, Mayor Urbanovich.
So no to the first and yes to the second.
Okay, I'm going to come back and do the second after.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. Councillor Marsh.
In favor of both. Sorry, we're not doing two at a time?
No, just for clarity,
okay.
Let's just do number 1.
Okay, yeah. In favor.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
In favor.
Councillor Johnston.
In favor.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Opposed.
Councillor Singh.
Opposed.
Councillor Gallo-Seelock.
Opposed.
Councillor Michaud.
Opposed.
Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
And Councillor Schneider.
Opposed.
And I am opposed, so that part fails. Now on the second part of this motion, Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
And Councillor Gazzola.
In favor.
Councillor Michaud.
In favor.
Councillor Gallo-Seelock.
In favor.
Councillor Singh.
In favor.
Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Johnston.
In favor.
Councillor Chapman.
In favor.
Councillor Marsh.
In favor.
Mayor Urbanovich.
In favor.
And I'm in favor as well. That carries unanimously. Okay, very good. Next issue paper, BDO 8 on freezing council non-union management salaries for 2021. Any questions or comments on this? I'm not seeing any. We'll move on to BD09, the public input. Mr. Haggie, did you want to provide an overview on this or just respond to questions?
Through you, Chair Davey, I was not planning to give an overview.
No problem. Any questions on this item or comments? No one commenting. I'm just going to comment very quickly in that. Okay, sorry, Councillor Marsh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just quite surprised that we didn't see more comments. I don't know if it's because the pandemic has everyone focused on other things, but I was pleased to see that the comments that we did have were quite positive, and so that's at least a comfort. It'll be interesting to see the engagement levels that we have going forward for the future budgets.
Very good. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, the results of are they shown on pages 61 to 65? Does that mean we had 17 people comment on our budget?
Yes.
And plus three was it three that came to council and presented?
I believe it was 4, but yes.
All right, I stand corrected. And what is the population of our city?
I believe it's in the range of 230 or 240,000 people.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, hi. I was actually quite surprised to see these numbers. I think, we have a lot of work to do to try and get people involved in the process. In fact, I had reached out to staff and was hoping to have small group meetings, which I did for the previous budget, and it was denied because of COVID. So I hope we can go back to that option so that we can hold budget meetings with through neighborhood associations and community centers and town halls, whether in person or online, because I think it's very valuable for people, and people do have questions. But if we don't provide the platform for them to do it, then we're losing out on a lot of feedback. So I really do hope that we can find ways to make this a more people-friendly process and get more people involved.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston.
Yes, thank you, and I concur with Councillor Chapman on that. I don't think that it is disappointing to only have seen 17 people reply, and I don't think that we can take that as necessarily no news is good news. I think that there's a lot of reasons. I don't think 2020 is a year that we can base any other statistics necessarily on. So I think we need to be really careful not to do this. But having more opportunities to ensure that residents have ways of getting in touch with us and knowing actually what is in the budget, I think is really important. So I do concur with Councillor Chapman on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I quite disagree with the last two comments that were made. I really see this as having the benefit of being here for the past 11 budgets and seeing with the significant engagement that we've had over the years, and I know staff and we've been constantly improving this engagement. To me, knowing that this is the lowest that we've had projection in the last 10 years and having the least amount of engagement, I think speaks volumes, in my opinions, as to the acceptance of this, of where we're going with that.
Thank you, Mayor Rabinovich.
Thank you very much, Chair Davey. Yeah, I too am disappointed that we didn't see a higher level of engagement. I think part of it can be attributed to COVID, but I also did notice this year, for example, that there was a lot more information being pushed out by staff through social media, and I think in doing so, educating citizens around some of the things that we're doing. And I think as has been noted by many, I recognize not all members of council, in comparison to other cities in the region and beyond, and people do hear this news, this is a good budget. And, so I think we, as a council can feel good about that, but we always have to endeavor, as Councillor Chapman has indicated, work to get, as many people engaged in this and other civic issues as possible, because ultimately that's how we build a better and stronger community.
Thank you. I'm going to echo those comments a bit. I got to say, I was actually quite surprised, being that, that the COVID has residents locked down. I thought, maybe the online engagement would have went up, and it did not. People literally can't go to work, and they've been forced into technology even if they're not into it. So I was forced to draw my own conclusions as well in some respect. And while more engagement is always good, like no one's ever going to deny that, I definitely take this to be like, I look at it as, your Rogers bill, right? Like no one contacts Rogers to say, hey, you're doing a great job. They contact Rogers when they screw up. Like that's when I phone them, when they come in with an increase that's too high. And I'm not saying that we're doing, perfectly and everyone's happy, but that is really how I took it. And frankly, as finance chair, I present to, just as a microcosm of that, I present to the Seniors Max Council every year in advance of budget. And it mirrored this perfectly. I made the presentation. I had a couple, really almost off-topic questions, because I think the residents understand that our staff are really doing the best they can. So that's how I take it. Maybe I'm an optimist, I don't know, but like I said, I'm not taking anything away from future engagement. As Councillor Chapman indicated, more is always better, and I will always look for more, but I'm not taking this as a negative. Okay, so that, I believe, Mr. Haggie completes the budget.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair, that's the end of the prepared material. Now would be the time if there are any other amendments, or barring that, passing the balance of the resolution that council has been provided.
Any comments or questions? I am not seeing any. So Mr. Haggie, we would just move the balance of the.
Yeah, so the tax levy increase is 0.94. So that's in resolution number 1. The percentage, instead of 1.10, is 0.94. The overall levy is 132,132,046,893. So we'd be looking for someone to move that and the balance of the resolution as well.
Very good. Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Oh, Councillor Singh, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, in capital, I had a couple conflicts where my family owned real estate along the roadways where there's schedule for capital improvements in 2021. So should I note it out now, or should we do that when we go into special council?
I think you have to do it in both, yeah. So now, and you'll have to do it again in special council.
Okay, all right. So I just outlined on page C-123 for Sterling-Mauser. That's 701205,129. And then on C-122, Ottawa Street from Charles Street to the Expressway, that's project 9010020007. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, can you tell me what are we approving now? What is this vote that you're taking now? Because this is going back to council for ratification, right?
In a couple of minutes, that's right.
So what are we voting on now?
We're just, Mr. Haggie, feel free to chime in, but effectively we're just approving everything that hasn't been missed, or approving the tax levy as proposed.
Okay.
Mr. Haggie, yes?
Yes, correct. So it's the tax levy, the economic development reserve items, the fleet replacements, the tier 1 grant amounts, essentially the entire balance of the detailed resolution that's provided to council.
Okay. So moved by Councillor Ioannidis, recorded vote. 1 second here. Mayor Benovich.
Support.
Councillor Marsh.
Support.
Councillor Chapman.
Support.
Councillor Johnson.
In favor?
Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, other than my noted conflicts, in favor.
Oh, apologies. Yes, we'll do that one secondly. Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
In favor?
Councillor Michaud.
In favor?
Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
And I'm in favor as well. And then we're just gonna have to do it one more time quickly for the noted conflicts by Councillor Singh. Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
Councillor Michaud.
In favor?
Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
In favor?
Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Johnson.
In favor?
Councillor Chapman.
Favor.
Councillor Marsh.
In favor.
Mayor Benovich.
In favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Okay, and I believe that concludes Finance and Corporate Services Committee, and we will move into Special Council. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, we'll hold on until Mr. Bunn gives me the all clear.
You're actually good to go, Mr. Mayor.
We're good to go. Okay, I'll call this special council meeting to order. Councillor Davey, would you like to bring forward the recommendations?
Yes, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Gallery-Seelock is the 2021 budget.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Michaud, are you looking to say something?
Yeah, it's live on my screen still. I'm just wondering.
Hey, it is live because we are. This
Okay.
is public.
Sorry.
But we're in special council.
Okay, sorry, I'm confused. I apologize.
No worries. No worries.
Okay.
So it's been moved by yourself, second by Councillor Gallery-Seelock. Thank you. And I guess I need to deal with them as two separate motions again in light of the conflicts. So I will do that. Nobody's asked for them to be, do I need to do them? Councillor Gazzola, are you asking for it to be in?
No, I'm not going to waste council's time. There are a number of items that I would be in favor, would support, but I'm totally opposed to the general principles in the budget. So one vote will do. Okay, although I do want to state that I'm not opposed to all of the issues, but I don't want to take staff's time and your council's time to go through them one by one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will deal with the items where there's a conflict first. Those in favor? Any opposed?
Yeah.
One opposed. Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. And the noted conflict, that carries. And then I'll deal with the balance of the recommendations. Those in favor?
This should be recorded.
You wanted to, okay, well, I asked and it sounded like you didn't want them. My apologies.
No. You should at least record the one general vote. I'm not asking you to break it all down.
No problem. No problem. We'll do it as a recorded vote. Thank you. Councillor Davey.
In favor.
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
Councillor Michaud.
In favor?
Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Singh.
Also in favor.
Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Johnson.
In favor?
Councillor Chapman.
In favor.
Councillor Marsh.
In favor.
And I am in favor as well, so the motion is carried. Motion for 3 readings, moved by Councillor Ioannidis, second by Councillor Michaud. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And before we end, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Councillor Davey for his chairing throughout all of these meetings, and Councillor Galloway-Silak jumped in and helped out a little bit today as well. So thank you for that. I think the fact that we were able to get through this in a timely manner, and also to have a budget that we can all be proud of is tremendous. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Lautenbach and his team, who have had to pivot and respond to all of the challenges, quite frankly, that this year has presented. The reality is that, not only him and his team, but the entire organization, led by our corporate leadership team, had to respond to COVID-19 and the constant changes that have happened as a result of the pandemic. And many of them had significant financial impacts on the organization. I think we can't lose sight of the fact of those who have been on DEL leave during the pandemic. Those were obviously difficult circumstances for us as a community to deal with, as we factored in all of the challenges going with the pandemic. And so we want to acknowledge that. Also want to acknowledge the fact that, while we today have developed a budget that, with the work of staff and ultimately council today, has allowed us to continue to focus on the priorities of our residents in terms of programs and services that we know are key, particularly during a pandemic. It's also allowed us to move forward on strategic priorities that we've talked about earlier in the day, such as our equity, anti-racism and Indigenous initiatives team, active transportation, recreational amenities in the Southwest, our Make It Kitchener economic development strategy, traffic calming, and the list goes on. So a sincere thank you to all of the finance team. And I know the work really only is ramping up now as you finish off the 2020 year and get everything into the systems for 2021. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I guess everyone, please continue to follow the public health directives and the provincial stay-at-home order. Stay home unless you absolutely need to go out for groceries, for a medical appointment, to get some physical exercise, or if you're not able to work from home. If you do go out, please remember to continue to wear a mask, maintain at least 2 meters physical distancing, and wash your hands regularly. And by sticking together, and today is Blue Monday, and we want to remind everyone on Blue Monday that for those who perhaps need some additional supports right now, because this is a difficult time, they can refer to the regional webpage at kitchener.ca/COVID-19 to access phone numbers for those supports in the coming days. But I know we're all in this together, and remember to be kind. And Councillor Schneider, did I see your hand wasn't up? Okay. So with that, thank you, everybody, and